Now, the reMarkable Paper Pure is the first new black and white reMarkable in 6 years since the reMarkable 2, but I don't think it's what everyone would have expected as a reMarkable 3 per se. So in this video, I'll try to break down some of the differences between the RM2, that, perhaps some other options, and see if the Paper Pure is right for you. Now, by reMarkable's own mention, it is 50% faster than the reMarkable 2, has 20% higher contrast than it, and has a 30% longer battery life. Something they don't mention in the specs, I think that is a benefit over the RM2, is the really slow charging of the RM2. I'm going to assume that this is the same standard as the Paper Pro Move, which charges up relatively quickly. This thing charges up pretty slowly, and also if it's dead, has this whole kind of ritual that you need to get into to charge it from zero. And the battery life claim is using it 1 hour per day, which seems pretty standard for what you'd use in e-ink note taker. Now, a couple years ago, I did a specific video on a reMarkable 3 wish list where I interviewed people like Kit and Brandon, who are specialists in the e-ink world. And one of the things that was kind of a consensus was that we wanted a 300 PPI device. It is a little disappointing to me that many years after we kind of expected a replacement for the reMarkable 2, it has basically the same PPI. It has 226 PPI, but I think clearly that probably comes down to cost. Now, one of the nice things about the screen is that it is Carta 1300, so it does have the higher contrast like they mentioned. And from my experience, it actually has better responsiveness as well than something like Carta 1000, which the reMarkable 2 was. One thing that's surprising to me is that you can see how incredibly thin the RM2 is. It's 4.7 millimeters. The Paper Pro Large was 5.1 millimeters. So I would have actually really expected something closer to the RM2 or like something in between the RM2 and the Paper Pro Large, but it is actually 6 millimeters thick. So it's going to be significantly larger than the RM2. If you already have an RM2, I think there are slight benefits, but there's also some disadvantages as well. One being the stylus as well, where the RM2 had its own issues. So because of the magnets on the case or side, you can get a little wobble on the side, but with active styli, you can get wobble anywhere on the page. That is something that you are then also restricted into the reMarkable ecosystem for their own pens, whereas the RM2 has Wacom and you can have other pens on here. Like I put a screen protector on here, and so now I can use even like Supernote styli that have the ceramic tips and use that on here. Whereas with the new reMarkable lineup, the Paper Pro lineup or the Pure lineup, you are locked into their marker ecosystem. But it is the same marker as the Paper Pro lineup. However, because it does use plastics, it is lighter. So this was 403.5 grams. The Paper Pure is 360 grams. So plastic versus metal and glass on the back does reduce the weight a little bit. And if you compare it to the Paper Pro lineup, the Move or the larger Paper Pro, the pen to ink distance reduced. So it went from 0.92 to 0.84. My guess is that's specifically because of the lack of a front light. But unless you are reading a lot of documents in the dark, I think personally with the reMarkable 2, I use it like a paper replacement. So I don't have a lot of scenarios where I think I need a front light. And the black and white tech does have better contrast than Gallery 3. So in dimmer lighting, you still can see things on the reMarkable 2 or the Paper Pure, which has better contrast than this, and make out those distinctions better than Gallery 3. But when compared to the Paper Pro, the screen texture should be exactly the same. So I think the RM2 will feel like a more premium device, but then again, things that are made out of plastic are typically more reliable and don't break as easy. And it is nice to see kind of like the Supernotes now, you do have accessibility with screws to get in the back. We've yet to hear exactly what sort of repairs you could do yourself. The Paper Pro was kind of all sealed. The Paper Pro Move had a fixed back, but it was all adhesives. And so it's good to see them move towards screws, which should make it easier to get into. Now, if you're looking specifically at the options for configuration, I think the one that just comes with the Pure and the marker is not nearly as good as the one with the Pure, the Marker Plus, and the Folio. I am partial towards having an eraser, so I would really evaluate if you need that. For 50 extra bucks, you're getting a better, more versatile marker, and you're getting a case. For me, that seems like a no-brainer. Unless you're watching this in the future, then likely you could probably get the base one and then buy a cheap aftermarket folio. Those will probably start coming out soon, I would imagine. The new folio does come in 3 different colors, but it is a very different design than the traditional folio styles here. I'd love to know your thoughts on the Paper Pure below. or if you have a reMarkable 2, maybe if you're considering upgrading or not. And then a few other things about reMarkable in general. If you haven't heard, they did fire about 200 of their staff recently, and that's about 40% of their workforce. So it's clear to me that with the rising supply costs of things like RAM and memory and all that stuff, that the hardware costs are increasing. So I honestly would have guessed that they would have probably released just a Gallery 3 A5 device this year, later in the year. But I think shifting to the Pure, it's very clear that the reMarkable 2 replacement was overdue. I personally think that the Paper Pro and the Paper Pro Move probably had really underwhelming sales for them, especially with the 100-day return policy, where people really get to try it. If you saw my Paper Pro Move video, I returned that device because I just thought it was very compromised, and the flashing on a smaller device just kind of drove me crazy because I had to be panning around a lot. And the flashing for me is actually just more distracting than having a pure black and white note taker, where you have less of that flashing. My friend Brandon did a comparison, and you can see that the Paper Pure, even though it's a cheaper device, it is quicker in general. I think the RM2 sales compared to the Paper Pro and the Paper Pro Move were probably so much larger that maybe they're returning back to basics. Who knows if they'll still create more color devices in the future, or they'll wait for that tech to get a little bit better and maybe RAM prices to come back down. One sign of that too is that they reduced their 100-day policy to a 50-day return policy, and Connect went up. It used to be $299, now it's $399 a month. So, I think laying off a lot of staff was a result of a lot of these factors and increasing supply costs, and maybe just not as much demand as they expected. This is just a theory, but also perhaps we know that AI is replacing a lot of jobs, so maybe some of the entry-level jobs were easily replaceable. And most companies' goals are to increase profit margins. So that's a potential as well. I'd love to know what your thoughts are on reMarkable's changes as a company recently, so let me know below in the comments. I personally think if you have a reMarkable 2 already, it's really not that big of an upgrade. But if you want something a little zippier and something a little more modern, then that could be an option for you. But I don't think you should go rushing out to buy it. I do think this makes some of the BooksGo Gen 1s or Gen 2s pretty interesting, because those are more modern devices. And one of them, the Lumi, does have a front light. So that is probably the #1 competition, I'd say, to this new reMarkable Paper Pure. I'd say besides the RM2 in terms of competition, the Supernote is much more expensive, so I don't think it directly competes. But the BooksGo 10.3 or the new Gen 2s that also have an active stylus, and one of them does have a front light, are potentially competitors in this space, I think. I'd love to hear if you are upgrading from an RM2, if you're considering the Paper Pure or not. If you want to see a comparison of e-ink note takers by category here, you can check that out here. Or if you want to see a breakdown of the other 3 reMarkable devices, you can see that here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.